In a room full of geniuses, 20 men with PhDs and cold hearts stared at a screen that spelled their doom. But they were looking for a code, while Rachel was looking for a heartbeat. As she knelt on the cold floor with a scrubbing brush in her hand, she realized the unbreakable encryption was actually a lullaby her father used to hum before the fire took him, and she knew that if she stayed silent for one more minute, the world would keep calling her just the maid while her sister died in the shadows. If you've ever felt like an invisible ghost in a world that only values titles, remember Rachel. Subscribe to join our community of underdogs and share this story with someone who needs to know that their hidden rhythm is exactly what the world is missing. What would you do if you were the only one who could see the truth? Tell us in the comments. We're listening. The 87th floor penthouse was a cathedral of glass and steel, suspended above Seoul like a frozen star. 20 experts sat in paralyzed rows, their fingers hovering uselessly over keyboards that might as well have been ancient stone tablets. They had flown in quantum physicists from MIT, black hat hackers from Moscow, a disgraced cryptographer who had once broken into the Pentagon's mainframe, and even a neurological AI specialist from Tokyo who claimed his algorithm could crack God's own encryption. All of them failed. 7 minutes remained on the holographic countdown. 7 minutes until the quantum-encrypted drive self-destructed, taking with it the only evidence that could prove Kang Tae-jun wasn't a traitor to his own family. 7 minutes until the Korean authorities seized everything: the money, the empire, the legacy his grandfather had built from ashes and blood. At the head of the room sat Kang Tae-jun himself, 34 years old, with cheekbones carved from marble and eyes like black ice that never blinked. They called him the Ice Dragon of Seoul, the man whose stare could make billionaires confess their sins. His Patek Philippe watch ticked in the suffocating silence. Tick, like the countdown to an execution. Tick, like the rhythm of a heart that refused to break. Then, a bucket clattered to the floor. Rachel Adebayo had been trying to move quietly past the wall of frozen bodies, her gray cleaning uniform making her as invisible as air. But her hand had slipped, and now sudsy water spread across the Italian marble like spilled blood. She dropped to her knees, her dark hands trembling as she scrambled to clean the mess, to disappear back into the shadows where girls like her belonged. But as she scrubbed, her eyes drifted upward to the massive screen dominating the room. Red error codes bled across the display like wounds that wouldn't stop bleeding. The experts were typing frantically, trying brute force algorithms, quantum frequency mapping, neural pattern recognition, everything the textbook said should work. But Rachel saw what 20 geniuses had missed. The encryption wasn't random, it was breathing. The recursive pattern pulsing on that screen, the way the numbers rose and fell, expanded and contracted, the specific rhythm of 4-3-2-4. It was the same sequence her father had used to hide his research journals. The same pattern he'd tap on her shoulder when she was 7 years old, afraid of thunderstorms in their cramped Lagos apartment. The same lullaby he'd hum while encoding his life's work, because Dr. Chukwu Adebayo believed that everything in the universe had a heartbeat, even data, even secrets, even hope. Rachel's hands stopped moving. A senior expert with silver hair and a Swiss accent slammed his laptop shut. "It's mathematically impossible," he spat. "The encryption is randomized across 47 dimensions. No human mind can—" "You're playing the notes," Rachel whispered. The room fell silent. 20 heads turned, fort eyes locked onto the young black woman kneeling on the floor with a scrubbing brush in her hand and fire in her eyes. "You're playing the notes," she repeated, her voice stronger now, each word a heartbeat. "But you're missing the rhythm." Kang Tae-jun's hand moved to his gun, not to threaten her, but to point it at the experts who had wasted his time and his empire's future. Because the girl with the bucket, the girl with the Nigerian accent that Seoul's elite pretended not to hear, the girl who had dropped out of her cybersecurity scholarship to pay for her sister's dialysis treatments, she had just seen the invisible. Her name was Rachel Adebayo, and this is the story of how a maid became the queen of the underworld. 6 hours earlier. Rachel Adebayo woke at 3:47 in the morning in a studio apartment in Itaewon, the cramped neighborhood where Seoul hid its foreigners and its poor. The hiss of the broken radiator echoed through the darkness like the breath of a dying animal. She lay motionless for 30 seconds, listening to the sound coming from the corner of the room where her sister slept. Maya's breathing was shallow and ragged, each inhale a struggle, each exhale a prayer. The dialysis machine beeped its steady rhythm. Beep, pause, beep. A mechanical heartbeat keeping a 16-year-old girl tethered to life by wires and chemicals, and Rachel's willpower alone. The nephrologist at Samsung Medical Center had been clear. Maya needed a kidney transplant within 8 months. The surgery, the post-op care, the anti-rejection medication, all of it would cost 180 million won, $135,000 USD. Rachel didn't even have $135 in her savings account. She slid out of the thin futon, careful not to make the floor creak. Her bare feet touched the cold linoleum and she shivered. December in Seoul was a different kind of cold, the kind that seeped into your bones and never left, the kind that reminded you every morning that you didn't belong here, that you were just passing through, barely tolerated, certainly not welcome. On the makeshift desk in the corner sat 3 framed photographs. The first, Rachel at 19, wearing her scholarship acceptance letter like armor, standing in front of Yonsei University's gates with her father beside her. Dr. Chukwu Adebayo, brilliant mechanical engineer, self-taught coder, the man who could fix anything with duct tape and differential equations. The second, Maya at 12, before the kidney disease, laughing at a birthday party Rachel had saved 3 months to afford. The third, an empty frame. Rachel kept it that way on purpose, waiting for the photo of Maya, healthy, transplanted, alive beyond her 20s. That frame was a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. She moved to the kitchenette, a hot plate, a mini fridge, a cabinet with instant ramen and expired rice. The bills were stacked on top of the fridge in a tower of shame. Rent, 2 months overdue. Electricity, final notice. Maya's dialysis sessions, 4.2 million units and climbing. Her father's funeral debt, still unpaid after 2 years. Rachel worked 4 jobs to survive in this city that treated her like a ghost. Mornings, cleaning offices in Gangnam from 5 a.m. to 10 a.m., invisible among Seoul's corporate elite. Midday, tutoring international school kids in coding for $30,000 an hour, but only when their parents weren't uncomfortable with a black tutor. Afternoons, translating technical documents from English to Korean for companies too cheap to hire professionals. Nights, the ghost shift, cleaning penthouses and private clubs for the ultra-wealthy, the ones who wanted their dirt erased by people they'd never have to see in daylight. She did the math every week, scratching numbers into a worn notebook like an archaeologist trying to decode a dead language. Even if she worked 20 hours a day, every day, for the next 2 years without eating or paying rent, she'd still be 40 million yunis short. The debt kept rising like floodwater, and Rachel was just one girl with a bucket, trying to hold back the ocean. Her eyes fell on the scar running down her left forearm, a thick, keloid ridge of darkened skin that never faded. 2 years ago, on a monsoon night in Lagos, her father had been working late in his garage workshop, the place where he coded encryption algorithms by candlelight and dreamed of patents that would never come. Rachel had been studying for her scholarship exam in the house when she smelled smoke. She ran outside and saw flames devouring the garage, heard her father screaming her name, telling her to stay back, to run, to save herself. She tried to break through the door, burned her arm on the metal handle, and then... the explosion. Dr. Chukwu Adebayo died instantly. Rachel survived with a scar and the encrypted hard drive her father had thrown through the window in his final moment of consciousness, wrapped in his jacket to protect it from the flames. She never cracked the encryption. Every night for 2 years she tried. Brute force, frequency analysis, pattern recognition, every method her father had taught her. But the code remained locked, and with it, his final research, his last words, his legacy. She was forced to bury him in debt, sell the garage and the house to pay for it, take Maya and flee to Seoul on her scholarship, believing education would save them. Then Maya got sick, and Rachel had to choose, finish her degree or keep her sister alive. She chose Maya. She always chose Maya. Now she stood in this frozen apartment at 4 in the morning, pulling on her gray cleaning uniform, the one that made her invisible, the one that screamed, "Servant!" in a city that already saw her as less than human because of her skin. Rachel looked at herself in the cracked mirror above the sink. Sunken eyes from chronic sleep deprivation, cheekbones too sharp from skipping meals so Maya could eat. 26 years old, but her face told the story of someone twice that age. Life had been draining her one drop at a time, and she was almost empty. Before leaving, she knelt beside Maya's bed. Her sister's lips had a bluish tint from poor circulation, her skin ashen against the white sheets. Rachel bent down and kissed her forehead, feeling the clamminess of her skin. "I'll fix this," Rachel whispered in Yoruba, the language of promises and prayers. "Baba taught me how to see rhythms no one else can see. I'll find a way." Maya didn't wake up. The dialysis machine beeped its lonely heartbeat. Rachel grabbed her cleaning supplies and stepped into the soul dawn, not knowing that in 12 hours she would break an unbreakable code, defy 20 geniuses, and catch the attention of the most dangerous man in Korea. Not knowing that her father's last gift, the rhythm hidden in his encryption, the heartbeat coded into chaos, would be the key to saving not just Maya's life, but her own soul. The girl the world called just the Maid was about to become the only person who could stop an empire from burning, and it would all begin with 5 words and a heartbeat. Chapter 1. Rachel learned to be invisible on her 3rd day in Seoul. Not the poetic kind of invisible that came with feeling lonely or misunderstood, but the tactical kind, the survival kind, the kind where your continued existence in a country depended on how well you could fold yourself into the wallpaper and disappear. She'd been standing in line at the immigration office in Gangnam, waiting to renew her student visa that was no longer valid because she'd dropped out to work illegally. The woman behind the counter had looked at her passport, looked at her face, then looked past her as if Rachel were made of glass. "Your kind always overstay," the woman said in Korean, not caring whether Rachel understood. "You come here, take our jobs, make our streets dirty." Rachel had smiled, bowed, and said nothing, because saying something meant deportation, and deportation meant Maya's death sentence. That was 18 months ago. Now invisibility was her superpower and her curse. The cramped studio in Itaewon cost 650,000 wons a month for 12 square meters of mold-stained walls and a window that overlooked a narrow alley where drunk foreigners vomited on weekends. The landlord, Mr. Park, had made it clear when she signed the lease that he was doing her a favor by renting to Africans. He raised the rent by 50,000 wons every 3 months, knowing she had nowhere else to go, knowing that desperation had an exchange rate. Maya slept in the corner on a medical bed Rachel had bought secondhand from a widow in Itaewon. The dialysis machine dominated half the room, its tubes and wires spreading like the roots of a mechanical tree, keeping her sister tethered to this world. 3 times a week, Rachel would hook Maya up to the machine herself because they couldn't afford the clinic anymore. She'd learned to insert the needles, monitor the blood flow, watch for signs of infection or clotting. YouTube videos and expired nursing textbooks had become her medical school. The math was brutal and simple. Each at-home dialysis session cost 180,000 wons in supplies. 12 sessions per month, 2.16 million wons, plus rent, plus food, plus the medications Maya needed to keep her body from rejecting its own blood. Rachel's 4 jobs brought in roughly 3.8 million wons on a good month. That left 400,000 wons for everything else: electricity, transportation, the prepaid phone that was her only lifeline to work, the debt collectors who called every Tuesday at 9 p.m. like clockwork. She kept a notebook hidden under the futon where she tracked every won spent, every won earned, every won still owed. The numbers never balanced. The gap between survival and catastrophe was $1.2 million and widening. But the money wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was the way Korea reminded her daily that she didn't belong. the ajumas in the market who clutched their purses tighter when she walked past, the mothers who pulled their children closer on the subway, whispering warnings about those people. The job interviews, where she was told her qualifications were impressive, but her cultural fit was questionable. The clubs and restaurants with signs in English, "Sorry, foreigners not allowed." Rachel had learned to move through Seoul like a ghost through walls, present but not seen, functional but not acknowledged, necessary but not valued. She cleaned the penthouses of billionaires who never learned her name. She coded algorithms for tech startups who paid her half what they'd pay a Korean developer. She tutored the children of diplomats who called her the black teacher instead of Rachel, as if her name were too difficult, too foreign, too much effort to remember. Every morning she woke up and made a choice: rage or resilience. Rage would get her deported. Resilience would keep Maya alive. So she swallowed her anger, perfected her bow, smiled when she wanted to scream, and became the invisible girl who cleaned up other people's messes while her own life fell apart in the shadows. Rachel was 7 years old the first time her father showed her that the world was alive. They were sitting in his garage workshop in Lagos, the air thick with the smell of soldering iron and machine oil. Rain hammered against the corrugated metal roof like 1,000 drumming fingers, and the single bulb hanging from a wire swayed with each gust of wind. Dr. Chukwu Adebayo sat hunched over a computer screen, his fingers dancing across a keyboard so old that half the letters had worn off. "Come here, Omomi," he said, his voice warm as summer rain. "My child." Rachel climbed onto his lap, her small hands resting on the desk beside his weathered ones. On the screen, lines of code scrolled past, green text on black, meaningless symbols that looked like the secret language of machines. "What do you see?" her father asked. "Numbers and letters," Rachel said. "Random things?" Her father smiled, the kind of smile that meant a lesson was coming. "Nothing in this world is random, Rachel. Everything has a pattern. Everything has a rhythm. Listen." He pointed to a specific section of code, a recursive function that looped and repeated. "See how it goes 4 beats, then 3, then 2, then back to 4? Like a heartbeat. Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum." He tapped the rhythm on her shoulder. 4 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, 4 taps. Rachel felt it vibrate through her small body, felt the pattern sink into her bones. "Computers don't think in straight lines," her father continued. "They think in rhythms, in pulses, in waves. Binary code is just ones and zeros, but those ones and zeros have a heartbeat. You find the heartbeat, you find the soul of the code." From that day forward, Rachel saw the world differently. When other children learned to count, Rachel learned to hear the count, the rhythm of numbers, the pulse of patterns, the heartbeat hidden in chaos. Her father taught her that traffic lights had a rhythm, that rainfall followed patterns, that even the way people spoke had a mathematical cadence. "The British colonizers," her father would say, "they tried to make us forget our rhythms. They tried to teach us their straight lines and their rigid rules. But our ancestors knew the truth. They knew that life is circular, that time is a spiral, that everything returns to its heartbeat." He taught her coding the way his grandmother had taught him folklore, as stories, as songs, as living things that breathed and grew. A sorting algorithm wasn't just an efficient way to organize data, it was a dance, a pattern of movement with its own rhythm and grace. Encryption wasn't about hiding information, it was about disguising the heartbeat so only those who knew the song could hear it. By the time Rachel was 12, she could break into her school's database, not by brute force, but by listening. She'd watch the cursor blink on the login screen, blink, pause, blink, and count the milliseconds between pulses. She'd feel the rhythm of the system, the way it breathed between commands, and then she'd slip through the gaps like water through fingers. "You have a gift, Omomi," her father told her on the night she earned her scholarship to Yonsei University. They were sitting in that same garage, older now, more cluttered with half-finished projects and dreams that never got funding. "But remember, the heartbeat is sacred. You use it to heal, not to harm. You use it to build, not to destroy. Rachel had promised. She'd sworn on his worn-out keyboard and his self-taught genius and the rhythm he'd planted in her soul. 2 weeks later, the fire took him. She never got to say goodbye. Never got to tell him that she'd memorized every rhythm he'd ever taught her, that she heard heartbeats in everything now, in Maya's breathing, in the rain against windows, in the hum of the dialysis machine, in the lonely pulse of her own survival. His encrypted hard drive sat in a drawer in her Seoul apartment, still locked after 2 years of trying. Sometimes, at night, Rachel would hold it and whisper in Yoruba, asking her father to show her the rhythm one more time, to give her the key to his final heartbeat. The drive never answered. But the lessons remained, coded into her DNA, waiting for the moment when the world would demand she remember that everything, even the unbreakable, has a heartbeat if you know how to listen. The elevator to the 87th floor required 3 different keycards, a fingerprint scan, and a retinal verification. Rachel stood in the back corner with her cleaning cart, eyes down, making herself small while the security guard studied her work permit like it might spontaneously combust in his hands. "You're the new cleaner?" His Korean was sharp, suspicious. "Yes, sir." Rachel kept her voice soft, deferential. "Mrs. Kim is sick. I'm covering her shift." He grunted, swiped her card one more time, then waved her through. The elevator doors closed with a whisper, and Rachel felt her stomach drop as the car rocketed upward, climbing toward a world where people like her only existed to empty trash and erase fingerprints. The penthouse doors opened onto a nightmare dressed as paradise. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Seoul sprawling below like a circuit board, millions of lights pulsing in the darkness. The interior was all sharp angles and cold surfaces. White marble, black leather, steel fixtures that gleamed like surgical instruments. Abstract art, worth more than Rachel would earn in 10 lifetimes, hung on walls that had probably never been touched by human hands. And everywhere, the smell of fear. 20 men sat frozen in rows, their faces pale and sweating despite the Arctic air conditioning. They hunched over laptops and tablets, their fingers trembling as they typed. Rachel recognized the body language immediately. These were men who knew they were already dead, just waiting for the bullet to confirm it. At the head of the room, Kang Tae-jun sat in a chair that might as well have been a throne. He was younger than Rachel expected, mid-30s maybe, but there was nothing young about his eyes. They were the kind of black that swallowed light, the kind that had witnessed things that would break normal men into fragments. His suit was tailored so perfectly, it looked like a second skin, charcoal gray with a black shirt open at the collar. No tie. Dragons didn't need costume jewelry to prove their power. His right hand rested on the arm of his chair, and Rachel could see the dragon tattoo coiling up his wrist, disappearing beneath his sleeve. His left hand held a gun, a Glock 19, polished and loaded, resting casually on his thigh like a sleeping pet that might wake up hungry. The holographic screen dominated the wall behind him, red numbers counting down in brutal clarity. 8 minutes and 47 seconds until the quantum drive self-destructed and took his empire with it. Rachel pushed her cart along the perimeter, trying to be invisible, trying to breathe quietly. She'd cleaned for dangerous men before, gangsters, corrupt politicians, men who treated human life like a line item in a budget. But Kang Tae-jun was different. He didn't radiate violence, he radiated certainty. The certainty that he could end any life in this room without blinking, without hesitation, without a single night of lost sleep. Useless. His voice cut through the silence like a blade through silk. He spoke in Korean, each word precise and cold. "I flew you here from MIT, Moscow, Tokyo. I paid you more money than most people earn in a year. And you sit here, sweating and crying, telling me the encryption is impossible?" One of the experts, a white man with silver hair and expensive glasses, cleared his throat. "Mr. Kang, with all respect, the quantum algorithm is randomized across 47-dimensional matrices. No human mind can—" Tae-jun raised the gun. The expert's words died in his throat. "I don't need excuses," Tae-jun said, his voice never rising above conversational. "I need results. You have 7 minutes left. If that drive self-destructs, I will assume you are either incompetent or working for my enemies. Either way, he chambered around with a sound that echoed like a death knell. I will dispose of every single one of you, personally. The room held its breath. Rachel's hands tightened on the handle of her cart. She told herself to keep moving, to stay invisible, to clean the windows and leave before the bullets started flying. But then she saw the screen, and she saw the heartbeat her father had taught her to hear, pulsing in the chaos like a familiar song. Her body moved before her mind could stop it. Rachel's bucket hit the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot. 20 heads snapped toward her, 40 eyes filled with contempt. How dare the help make noise during their execution? But Rachel wasn't looking at them. She was staring at the holographic display, at the cascading error codes that the experts saw as chaos, but she heard as music. 4 beats, pause. 3 beats, pause. 2 beats, pause. 4 beats, ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. It was her father's rhythm, the same pattern he'd tapped on her shoulder when she was 7, the same encryption sequence he'd used to lock his research journals, the same heartbeat that had died with him in the fire. "You're playing the notes," Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of failing computers. "But you're missing the rhythm." The room went silent. Kang Taejun's eyes locked onto her like laser sights. "What did you say?" Every instinct Rachel had cultivated over 18 months in Seoul screamed at her to bow, apologize, disappear. Girls like her didn't speak in rooms like this. Black women with cleaning carts didn't correct men with PhDs and 6-figure salaries. Survival meant invisibility. But Maya was dying. The dialysis bills were drowning her. And this code, this impossible, unbreakable code, was speaking her father's language. Rachel dropped the mop. She stepped forward, her worn sneakers squeaking against marble that cost more per square foot than her monthly rent. The silver-haired expert from MIT started to protest, but Taejun raised one hand, silencing him without a word. "You have something to say?" Taejun's voice was ice wrapped in silk. "Say it carefully. I've already killed 3 people today." Rachel's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept walking until she stood in front of the main terminal. The countdown glared at her. 6 minutes 23 seconds. 6 minutes and 23 seconds. "The encryption isn't random," she said, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "It's rhythmic. It's alive. It breathes." "Impossible," the MIT expert spat. "Quantum encryption doesn't follow. Everything follows a heartbeat if you know how to listen." Rachel's hands touched the keys, and suddenly she wasn't in a Seoul penthouse anymore. She was 7 years old in her father's garage, rain drumming on metal, his voice in her ear, teaching her that code was music, and music was mathematics, and mathematics was the language God used to write the universe. Her fingers moved. Not typing, dancing. 4 keystrokes, pause. 3 keystrokes, pause. 2 keystrokes, pause. 4 keystrokes. She wasn't entering a password, she was conducting a symphony. The recursive algorithm that had stumped 20 geniuses wasn't looking for brute force. It was looking for recognition. It was looking for someone who understood that encryption at this level wasn't about complexity. It was about intimacy. It was about knowing the soul of the code, the personality of the programmer, the heartbeat hidden in the chaos. Rachel typed the sequence again, this time varying the intervals between keystrokes. Not random variations, rhythmic ones. The spaces between the notes mattered as much as the notes themselves. Rest was as important as sound. Silence was part of the song. The screen flickered. The error codes stopped cascading. Someone gasped. Rachel closed her eyes and let her father's ghost guide her fingers. She typed the sequence a 3rd time, but this time she syncopated it, shifted the rhythm slightly off-center, the way jazz musicians played behind the beat, the way her father used to hum when he was encoding something precious. 4 beats, but the 4th held longer. 3 beats, but the 2nd came early. 2 beats, staccato and sharp. 4 beats, flowing like water. The countdown stopped at 000047. The screen flashed green. Access granted. The holographic display bloomed with data, files, documents, video recordings, financial ledgers, everything Kang Tae-jun needed to prove his innocence, all of it spilling across the screen like treasures from an open tomb. The room erupted in chaos. Experts shouting, chairs scraping, men rushing forward to see what the cleaning woman had done in 60 seconds that they couldn't do in 48 hours. But Rachel only heard the silence. The silence of her father's rhythm finally answered. The silence of Kang Tae-jun's gun, still pointed at her head, his eyes wide with something that looked like recognition, or fear, or the beginning of obsession. "Who are you?" he whispered. Rachel turned to face the ice dragon of soul, her hands still trembling, her heart still hammering her father's rhythm against her ribs. "My name is Rachel Adebayo," she said, "and I just saved your life." Tae-jun dismissed the experts with a single word in Korean that Rachel didn't need translated. The 20 men scrambled for the elevator like rats abandoning a sinking ship, relieved to leave with their lives if not their dignity. Within 90 seconds, the penthouse was empty except for Rachel, Tae-jun, and 2 bodyguards who stood by the door like statues carved from violence. "Sit," Tae-jun said, gesturing to the chair directly across from his. Rachel looked at the chair, black leather, probably worth more than her entire apartment, then at her gray cleaning uniform, stained with sweat and floor cleaner. "I'll dirty it." "I don't care about the chair." His eyes never left her face. "Sit." She sat. Tae-jun studied her the way a jeweler might study a diamond found in a gutter, trying to determine if it was real or just glass catching the light. He pressed a button on his phone and spoke in rapid Korean. Less than 3 minutes later, one of the bodyguards returned, carrying a black garment bag and a leather briefcase. "You can't work for me looking like that," Tae-jun said, sliding the garment bag across the table. "There's a bathroom behind that door. Clean yourself up. Put on what's inside. We have business to discuss." Rachel wanted to argue, to tell him she wasn't some doll he could dress up, but the pragmatic part of her brain, the part that had kept her alive in soul, knew this wasn't the moment for pride. She took the bag and disappeared into the bathroom. The bathroom was larger than her entire studio. Marble everywhere, gold fixtures, a shower with 6 different heads. Rachel washed quickly, scrubbing the smell of cleaning chemicals from her skin. The garment bag contained a charcoal suit, tailored, expensive, with a silk blouse the color of deep wine. The clothes fit perfectly, which meant Tae-jun had sized her up in seconds and called in favors to have this delivered immediately. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked like someone who belonged at the table, someone who mattered. When she returned, Tae-jun had poured 2 glasses of whiskey. He slid one across to her. "I don't drink," Rachel said. "You do now." It wasn't a suggestion. She took the glass but didn't drink. Tae-jun smiled, not warmly, but with something like approval. 20 experts, he said, leaning back in his chair. Some of the finest minds in digital security. I paid them a combined total of 800 million won, and they couldn't do in 2 days what you did in 60 seconds. So I'll ask you again, who are you really? I told you, Rachel Adebayo, former cybersecurity student at Yonsei, now a cleaning woman trying to keep her sister alive. Why did you drop out? Maya needed dialysis. School doesn't pay bills. Cleaning does. Tae-jun nodded slowly, processing. And the code? How did you break it? Rachel hesitated. The truth felt too intimate, too precious to share with a man who held a gun like other people held phones. But something in his eyes, not kindness, but a ruthless form of respect, made her speak. My father taught me to hear rhythms in code. He believed everything has a heartbeat, including data. The encryption wasn't random. It was alive. I just listened. Your father was a programmer? A mechanical engineer, self-taught coder. He died 2 years ago. Tae-jun was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those black eyes that seemed to calculate probabilities and outcomes faster than any computer. Finally, he leaned forward, elbows on the table, and spoke with the certainty of a man who had never heard the word no. "I'm going to make you an offer, Rachel Adebayo. You work for me, not as a cleaner, as my personal digital security specialist. You protect my data, my networks, my secrets. In return, I will pay for your sister's transplant. I will clear your father's debts. I will give you a salary that will make your 4 jobs look like pocket change." Rachel's heart stopped. "Why would you do that?" "Because you have a gift that can't be bought or taught. Because I have enemies who would pay billions for what you just did. Because—" He paused, his expression hardening. "In my world, loyalty is rare and talent is rarer. You have both." "You don't know if I'm loyal." "No, but I know you're desperate. And desperate people are predictable." He slid a contract across the table, thick with legal language and numbers that made Rachel's vision blur. 200 million won signing bonus. Your sister gets priority placement for transplant at Samsung Medical Center. After that, 500 million won per year, plus housing, plus protection. Rachel stared at the contract, at the numbers that represented Maya's life, her father's honor, her own escape from invisibility. "What's the catch?" Taejun's smile was sharp as broken glass. "The catch is simple. You belong to me now. Your mind, your skills, your loyalty. You protect my data, and I will protect your blood. But if you betray me—" He placed his gun on the table between them. "I will kill you and everyone you love, starting with Maya." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Rachel picked up the pen. Rachel learned within her first week that the Korean underworld operated on a hierarchy as rigid as iron and as ancient as blood. At the top sat Taejun, the ice dragon. Below him, the lieutenants, men in their 50s and 60s who had earned their positions through violence, cunning, and decades of unflinching loyalty. Below them, the foot soldiers, the enforcers, the fixers. And then there was Rachel, a category that didn't exist in their medieval system. The first council meeting was a masterclass in humiliation wrapped in politeness. 8 men sat around a mahogany table in a private room at a Gangnam restaurant, drinking soju and discussing territorial disputes, money laundering routes, and political bribes. Rachel sat at the end of the table in her new suit, her tablet open, ready to present the security vulnerabilities she'd identified in their communication networks. No one looked at her. For 40 minutes, they spoke in rapid Korean, peppered with terms she didn't know. Old gangster slang, regional dialects, deliberate obfuscation. When she tried to interject, Lieutenant Park spoke over her as if she'd never opened her mouth. When she tried again, Lieutenant Cho turned to Taejun and said in English, clearly for her benefit, "Boss Nim, perhaps your assistant would be more comfortable waiting outside?" Taejun's response was a look that could freeze blood. "She stays, and when she speaks, you listen." The men bowed their heads in compliance, but Rachel saw the rage simmering behind their eyes. She'd violated the natural order. She was black in a country that prized pale skin. She was a woman in a world built by and for men. She was an outsider in an organization that valued bloodlines and brotherhood above all else. She was an insult wrapped in designer clothes. But Taejun had taught her something valuable in their first private meeting after she signed the contract. "In war," he'd said, "your enemy's contempt is your greatest weapon. Let them underestimate you. Let them think you're decoration. Then strike when they're not looking." So Rachel became a ghost again, but this time by choice. She attended the meetings, took notes, said little. She dressed impeccably, but never flashy. She bowed when appropriate, used formal Korean even though her accent marked her as foreign, and never challenged the men directly in front of others. She played the role of Taejun's exotic pet, his strange American experiment, his diversity hire. And while they ignored her, she listened. She heard Lieutenant Park mention a side account in Singapore during a phone call he thought was private. She noticed Lieutenant Cho checking his phone obsessively during strategy sessions, texting someone he shouldn't be. She watched the younger soldiers gamble away protection money, skim profits, trade favors with rival gangs. But her greatest advantage came during a meeting with the Busan faction, a smaller syndicate trying to negotiate a shipping alliance with the Iron Lotus. Their boss, a scarred man named Huang, brought his entire crew to Seoul for the negotiation. 12 men, all wearing identical black suits, all carrying the same brand of cigarettes. They sat across from Taejun's team in a private club in Gangnam. Rachel sat in the corner with her tablet, taking notes, functionally invisible. The men discussed shipping routes, profit splits, territorial boundaries. Standard business. But Rachel noticed something the others missed. One of Huang's men, a thin guy with a nervous tic, kept glancing at his phone under the table. Not scrolling, not texting, just watching something. His screen reflected in the lacquered table surface for half a second, and Rachel caught it. A live audio feed from someone else in the room. They were being recorded. Rachel's eyes scanned the room, tracking angles and sightlines. There, a decorative statue on the shelf behind Taejun's chair. Bronze, traditional, innocuous, but positioned perfectly to capture audio from the entire table. She pulled out her phone and opened her signal detection app, disguising it as a text message. The statue pinged hot, active transmission on a frequency typically used by police surveillance equipment. A setup. Huang was working with the authorities, gathering evidence to bring down both syndicates at once. Rachel stood up, walked to the shelf as if examining the art. "This is beautiful," she said in English, picking up the statue. "May I?" She didn't wait for an answer. She turned the piece over in her hands, found the microscopic camera embedded in the base, and smiled directly into it. Then she dropped the statue. It shattered across the floor, circuit boards and wiring spilling out like mechanical guts. The room exploded. Huang's men reached for guns. Taejun's soldiers moved faster, weapons drawn, exits blocked. Huang's face went white as fresh snow. Taejun looked at Rachel with something that might have been admiration, or might have been hunger. "Explain." "They were recording everything," Rachel said calmly, her heart hammering but her voice steady. "Police frequency transmission. The thin one," she pointed to the nervous man, "was monitoring the feed. They plan to deliver you both to the authorities after this meeting." Taejun turned to Huang. "Is this true?" Huang said nothing. His silence was confession enough. What happened next, Rachel didn't watch. She'd learned quickly that some parts of this world required willful blindness. She walked out of the room, past the guards, into the cold Seoul night. Behind her, she heard 3 gunshots. In front of her, a text from Taejun. "You just earned your salary. Well done." Rachel stared at the message, at the blood money pixels glowing on her screen, and realized she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. She'd just helped murder 3 men. And the worst part? She'd do it again to save Maya. Rachel was 3 levels deep in the Iron Lotus server infrastructure when the first alarm screamed. She'd been tracking anomalies for 2 weeks, phantom login attempts, ghost packets routing through their financial systems, microsecond delays in data transfers that shouldn't exist. Someone inside the organization was building a backdoor, and Rachel had finally traced the source to a subnet registered to Kang Min-ho, Taejun's half-brother. The prodigal son. The American-educated tech genius who'd been living in Silicon Valley for 5 years, supposedly running legitimate ventures. The one person in the Kang family who'd rejected the underworld life. Or so everyone thought. Rachel was in the basement server room of the Iron Lotus headquarters, a converted warehouse in Yeongdeung-po, where rows of black towers hummed like mechanical hearts, processing the empire's encrypted transactions. She'd come alone at 2 a.m. because paranoia had become her religion, and she trusted no one except herself. Her laptop screen filled with cascading data as she peeled back layers of Min-ho's intrusion. He wasn't just stealing information, he was building a kill switch, a program designed to simultaneously crash the Iron Lotus financial systems, expose their money laundering routes to authorities, and wipe every backup they had. A digital apocalypse triggered by a single command. Rachel's fingers flew across the keyboard, copying evidence, building countermeasures, trying to... The lights went out. Not just in the server room. Everywhere. Through the small window near the ceiling, Rachel saw Seoul go dark. Block by block, district by district, a wave of blackness swallowing the city like a living thing. 8 million people plunged into darkness in 17 seconds. Her laptop screen glowed in the void, and she watched in horror as Minho's program activated. Not just targeting the Iron Lotus systems, but the entire city's power grid. He'd hacked into the Korea Electric Power Corporation, turned their own infrastructure into a weapon, and now Seoul was dying from digital suffocation. Rachel's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You should have stayed invisible, little maid. Now you burn with him." The smell hit her before she saw the flames. Smoke, electrical fire, the acrid stench of melting plastic and burning circuits. She looked up and saw orange light flickering between the server racks. Minho hadn't just crashed the systems. He'd overloaded them, pushed them beyond thermal limits, turned the entire room into a furnace. The fire suppression system should have triggered, should have flooded the room with halon gas. But the suppression system ran on the same network Minho had just destroyed. Flames crawled up the server towers like living creatures, spreading faster than Rachel thought possible. Smoke filled the room, thick and black, choking. She grabbed her laptop and ran for the door. Locked. The magnetic locks had failed in the default closed position. Rachel slammed her shoulder against the steel, screaming for help that wouldn't come because the building's alarm system was digital, connected to the network that no longer existed. The heat intensified. Rachel's eyes watered, her lungs burned. She was 7 years old again, standing outside her father's garage in Lagos, watching flames devour the only person who'd ever taught her that she was brilliant. She was screaming for him, hearing his voice telling her to run, to save herself, to... No. Rachel forced herself to breathe through her shirt, forced her mind to work through the panic. The door was steel, impenetrable. The window was 8 feet up, too small for a person but large enough for... She grabbed her laptop and hurled it at the window. Glass shattered. Cold air rushed in, feeding the fire behind her, making it roar like a hungry beast. But now she had oxygen, had a chance. Rachel dragged a server rack beneath the window, burning her hands on the hot metal, and climbed. Smoke poured through the opening, and she could hear sirens in the distance, fire trucks navigating a blacked-out city where traffic lights didn't work and emergency systems were offline. She pulled herself through the window, felt glass slice her arms, felt the cold Seoul air hit her smoke-covered face like salvation. She dropped 8 feet onto frozen grass and rolled, gasping, coughing, alive. Behind her, the server room exploded. Windows shattered, flames erupted through the roof, and Rachel watched 2 years of the Iron Lotus digital infrastructure turn to ash and smoke. But she still had the evidence. She'd copied Minho's files to a secure drive in the 30 seconds before the power died. She had his communications, his financial transfers, his entire conspiracy mapped and documented. Rachel pulled out her phone, miraculously intact, and called Tae-jun. "It's Minho," she said, her voice raw from smoke. "Your brother is trying to kill you, and he just declared war on all of Seoul to do it." The line was silent for 3 seconds. Then, Tae-jun's voice, cold as winter. "Where are you?" "Watching your empire burn." "Good. That means you survived. Minho made his first mistake. He left you alive. Now we make him regret it." Rachel looked at the flames reflected in her phone screen, at her scarred arm bleeding from fresh cuts, at the city drowning in darkness around her. She'd escaped fire twice now. The third time, she'd bring the fire herself. Rachel was in Tae-jun's war room, surrounded by laptops and screens showing the city's slow recovery from the blackout, when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Samsung Medical Center. Her blood turned to ice. "Ms. Adebayo?" The nurse's voice was strained, professional panic barely contained. "There's been a situation with Maya's life support systems. The digital controls have been compromised. We need you to come immediately. Rachel was already running. What do you mean, compromised? Someone has remote access to her dialysis equipment. They've locked us out of the manual override. If we can't regain control in the next 20 minutes, the machine will— The nurse's voice cracked. It will reverse the blood flow. Ms. Adebayo, your sister will bleed out from the inside. The phone slipped from Rachel's hand. Taejun caught it before it hit the floor, listened for 3 seconds, then ended the call. His face was carved from stone. Minho, he said, not a question, a certainty. Rachel's phone buzzed. A video call from an unknown number. She answered. Minho's face filled the screen, handsome, clean-cut, with Taejun's cheekbones but softer, friendlier. The kind of face that belonged in a Stanford hoodie, not orchestrating murder. Behind him, Rachel could see multiple monitors displaying live feeds from Maya's hospital room. Hello, Rachel, Minho said in perfect English. I've been wanting to meet my brother's pet genius. Touch my sister and I will destroy you. Rachel's voice was steady, despite the terror clawing at her chest. You misunderstand. I'm not touching anything. The machine will do it for me in— He glanced at his watch. 18 minutes. Unless you make a choice. A second screen appeared. Financial data. The Iron Lotus offshore accounts. 847 billion won, roughly $635 million USD, spread across 17 banks in 8 countries. The empire's entire liquid assets. Here's your choice, Rachel. You can spend the next 18 minutes trying to save your sister, bypassing my encryption, racing against time like the hero you think you are. Or, Minho smiled, you can transfer these accounts to the routing numbers I'm sending you. The moment the money clears, I release your sister. You save her life, but you destroy my brother's empire. Choose. The screen went black. Rachel stared at her laptop, at the 2 impossible problems branching before her like roads to different hells. Save Maya and betray Taejun. Save the empire and let her sister die. Taejun stood behind her, his presence heavy as gravity. I won't tell you what to choose, he said quietly, but know this, if you bankrupt me, I cannot protect you from what comes next. My enemies will tear you apart, slowly. Rachel's hands shook. 16 minutes left. She could crack Minho's encryption on Maya's life support, probably. He was brilliant, but arrogant. He'd left patterns, rhythms, the same algorithmic signatures he'd used on the city's power grid. But it would take time. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe more. Or she could transfer the money. 3 clicks. Maya lives, everything else dies. There's always a third option, Rachel whispered. Her father's voice, from a lifetime ago, teaching her that binary choices were illusions. Her fingers began to move. She pulled up Minho's hospital hack, started analyzing the code. But she wasn't trying to break it. She was trying to understand it. Where was he routing the data? What servers was he using? What network was keeping Maya's death machine connected? 15 minutes. Rachel found it. Minho was running the hospital hack through the same command server controlling the financial transfer protocol. Same system, same heartbeat. He'd built his entire attack on a single infrastructure. Elegant, efficient, and catastrophically stupid. She started coding. Not a defensive program, an offensive one. A logic bomb. 14 minutes. She wrote a program that would execute the instant Minho's system detected the money transfer. The transfer would begin. Minho would see the accounts emptying, would start celebrating his victory. But 1 microsecond before the money reached his accounts, Rachel's logic bomb would activate. It would reverse the transfer, redirect everyone back to the Iron Lotus accounts, then use Minho's own hospital hack against him, feeding false data that showed Maya's life support functioning normally, while Rachel's program simultaneously unlocked the manual override for the real nurses. Then, the killing stroke. Her logic bomb would trace Minho's location through his command server and broadcast it to every device in Taejun's network. 12 minutes. Rachel's hands flew across the keyboard, building a program that was part deception, part warfare, part prayer. She was coding in 3 languages simultaneously, weaving logic loops that would make her father proud. 8 minutes. She hit execute. The money began transferring. On her screen, she watched billions of won start flowing toward Minho's accounts. Her phone buzzed. Minho's face, grinning. "Smart choice, Rachel. Your sister lives. Pity about your—" The smile died. His screen erupted in red error codes. The money reversed, flooding back like a tidal wave. At Samsung Medical Center, the manual override activated. Nurses rushed to Maya's side, disconnecting the compromised equipment, stabilizing her vitals. And on Taejun's main screen, a GPS location appeared. An apartment in Gangnam, 14th floor, unit 1407. "Found you," Rachel whispered. Minho's face on her phone screen twisted with rage. "You think you've won? You think—" Taejun took the phone from Rachel's hand. "Hello, little brother," he said. "I'm coming for you, and I'm bringing the girl who's smarter than both of us." He ended the call. Rachel collapsed into her chair, shaking, tears streaming down her face. Not from fear, but from the crushing relief that Maya was alive, that she'd found the third option, that she'd beaten the monster who tried to make her choose. Taejun's hand rested on her shoulder, not gentle, but present. "You just earned your throne," he said. "Now let's go claim it." Minho died in his Gangnam apartment at 4:47 a.m., surrounded by the technology he'd trusted more than family. Taejun's soldiers found him trying to wipe his hard drives, delete the evidence, erase himself from the digital record. He failed. Rachel had already copied everything. Every transaction, every conspiracy, every name of everyone who'd betrayed the Iron Lotus. What happened in that apartment, Rachel didn't witness. She stayed in the car, listening to Maya's breathing through a video call, watching her sister sleep peacefully under proper medical supervision, while men dispensed justice she'd helped deliver. When Taejun returned, his knuckles were bloodied, but his face was calm. He said nothing. Some silences carried more weight than confession. The purge began at dawn. Lieutenant Park, who'd been skimming profits for 3 years. Lieutenant Cho, who'd been feeding information to the Busan faction. 7 foot soldiers who'd taken Minho's money to sabotage operations from within. Rachel's forensic analysis had mapped the entire conspiracy with mathematical precision. Follow the money, track the communications, let the data tell the truth that men's mouths would lie about. By noon, the Iron Lotus had bled itself clean. By sunset, Seoul's underworld whispered a new name with fear and fascination: the Black Queen. The woman who'd brought down an empire's traitors with nothing but a laptop and a father's rhythm. The council meeting that night was different. Rachel entered the private room at the Gangnam restaurant, the same room where she'd once been ignored, spoken over, treated like decoration. The 8 remaining lieutenants stood when she walked in. Not because Taejun commanded it, because she'd earned it with blood and brilliance, and the kind of ruthless competence that made dangerous men feel safe and traitors feel terror. She sat at Taejun's right hand, not at the end of the table, not in the corner, at his right hand, where his most trusted advisor belonged. Taejun addressed the room in Korean, then switched to English, not for Rachel's benefit, but as acknowledgement that she was no longer the outsider, no longer the foreigner, no longer the help. She was the architect of their survival. "The Iron Lotus nearly died because we trusted blood over ability," Taejun said. "My brother was family, and he tried to destroy us. Rachel Adebayo was a stranger, and she saved us. This is the last time we make that mistake." He stood, walked around the table, and did something Rachel had never seen a Korean mob boss do. He knelt. Not the formal bow of respect, not the ritual show of hierarchy. He knelt before her the way a man kneels before an equal, before a partner, before a queen. The room held its breath. "For 30 years, my family has built this empire on fear and violence and the old ways," Taejun said, his voice carrying the weight of confession. "We've survived by being more brutal than our enemies, more ruthless than the law. But the world is changing. The wars of tomorrow won't be fought with guns and territory. They'll be fought with data and algorithms and minds like yours. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside, a ring, not a diamond engagement ring, but something older, heavier with meaning. A black jade stone carved with the symbol of the Iron Lotus, set in platinum. "I'm not asking you to marry me," Taejun said, and several lieutenants shifted uncomfortably at the bluntness. "Not yet. Maybe never if you choose. But I'm asking you to help me transform this organization, to take us from the shadows into the light, to build something my grandfather would recognize, but my grandchildren won't be ashamed of." Rachel stared at the ring, at the man kneeling before her, at the 8 hardened criminals watching this moment with expressions ranging from shock to calculation to something that might have been hope. 6 months ago, she'd been invisible, a ghost in a gray uniform, scrubbing floors, counting coins, watching her sister die in slow motion while Seoul pretended she didn't exist. Now, a kingpin knelt before her, offering her a throne built on violence and the promise of redemption. "What would this new order look like?" Rachel asked. "Legitimate businesses, tech ventures, green energy, infrastructure. We keep the protection networks, but eliminate the trafficking, the drugs, the things that make us parasites instead of power brokers. We use our money to build instead of destroy. And you—" Taejun's black eyes met hers with an intensity that felt like gravity. "You become the mind behind it all, my strategist, my partner, my equal." Rachel thought about her father, who taught her that everything had a heartbeat, even data, even hope. She thought about Maya, healthy now, thriving, alive because Rachel had refused to choose between love and survival. She thought about the girl she'd been, invisible, desperate, diminished, and the woman she'd become. She took the ring. Not because she trusted Taejun completely, not because she believed the underworld could ever be truly clean, but because she'd learned that power wasn't given. It was taken, and she'd just taken enough to rewrite the rules. "I have conditions," Rachel said. Taejun smiled, the first genuine smile she'd ever seen from him. "I would expect nothing less." "Maya gets the transplant within 3 months. My father's debts are cleared, and we establish a scholarship fund in his name for Nigerian students studying in Korea. And—" she held up the ring, watching it catch the light. "I don't wear this until I've proven this empire can be rebuilt without burning more fathers and more fires." "Agreed." Rachel slipped the ring onto her right hand, not her left, not yet, and looked at the men around the table. Some of them still saw her as the black maid who'd gotten lucky. Some of them saw her as the genius who'd saved their lives. All of them would learn to see her as she truly was, the heartbeat of a new empire, the rhythm they'd dance to or die ignoring. "Then let's begin," Rachel said. "The world thinks we're criminals. Let's show them what criminals with vision can build." Outside, Seoul glittered like a circuit board, 8 million heartbeats pulsing in the darkness. And Rachel Adebayo, who'd once been invisible, was finally, irrevocably seen.